Morning, afternoon, evening. Welcome to MBS Connect, a daily walk through Proverbs. Today is day 65, and our topic for today is the futility of blame. And our lead verse comes from John chapter 9, verses 1 through 3. Walking down the street, Jesus saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, causing him to be born blind? Jesus said, You're asking the wrong question. You're looking for someone to blame. There is no such cause effect here. Look instead for what God can do. And I think God is trying to talk to us and tell us that there's futility in blame. There's useless. It's just useless to blame. Instead of asking the question or trying to figure out who's to blame, we should look to see what God has in store, what God is doing in us or with us or through someone else, instead of trying to place the blame. And our daily walk through Proverbs starts off with, to blame others for our own problems is the height of futility. It's useless. Yet blaming others is a favorite human pastime. Why? Because blaming is much easier than fixing, and criticizing others is so much easier than improving ourselves. This blame game, guys, started way back in the Adam and Eve days in Eden, where when God wanted to know why did Adam eat the apple that he told him not to, the first thing he did, he blamed the woman. He blamed Eve. And then what did Eve do? She blamed the snake. She blamed the serpent. So we've been doing this, guys, for the longest. Instead of truly looking inside and seeing what God wants us to do, and that God can help us fix or help us address a situation, whether us laying the blame or criticizing others, and nothing's going to happen from that. That problem's not going to get solved that way if we continue to blame. Instead, let's look for ways to fix it, and let's also look to see what God can do in that situation. So instead of solving our problems legitimately by doing the work required to solve them, we are inclined to fret, to blame, and to criticize while doing precious little else. When we do, our problems quite predictably remain unsolved. So that is pretty much the result from laying blame is we get nothing solved. And I heard this quote back when I was in college that really impacted me, and it said that our ancestors who had nothing did everything. Think of all the things that our ancestors accomplished back during a time where they were enslaved, they were discriminated through Jim Crow laws and all that stuff, and yet they still went on to be professors, doctors, business owners. And yet our generation, who has everything, we do nothing because we're still laying the blame. We're still saying he did this, she did that, they did this. It was the man, society, the system. Let's not lay blame like our ancestors who fixed things, who relied on God to work things out. Let's take note and let's also do it ourselves. So instead of looking for someone to blame, look for something to fix and then get to fixing it. And as you consider your own situation, remember this: God has a way of helping those who help themselves, but he doesn't spend much time helping those who don't. So even, guys, even if you didn't start off well, don't blame, press forward. Don't let your yesterdays hold you back from your potential. Even if those who are closest to you, your friends, your families, and your loved ones, don't support you, don't blame, press forward. And even if you have surprises that comes out in your life, don't blame, press forward. It's going to be times where you're at an intersection and surprise is dead in front of you. Instead of laying the blame game and criticizing folks, press forward and look to see what God wants to do and what God can do in you and through you to overcome, any obstacles. Because there's going to be times where things don't go well, when people harm you, but we have this choice and decisions not to lay blame, but to press forward. And a great biblical example of that is the story of Joseph, who was this privileged son who told his brothers about this dream he had that in the end would have them bowing down to him and he would be greater than them. So obviously, his 11 brothers didn't like that. So they plotted to kill this guy, but instead of killing him, they threw him in this pit, and they saw these merchant folks walking around, and they sold him into slavery. And they went back and they lied to their daddy, telling him that an animal devoured him and killed him. And yet God was with Joseph. Joseph ended up in Potiphar's house, who Potiphar was the actual second to command and to the Pharaoh. But Potiphar's wife, she was a cougar in that time. She was an older woman, and here's Joseph at 17. She tried to seduce him. Joseph ran away. She lied on him. He ended up in jail. So you can see all the things Joseph could be blamed. He could blame his brothers. He can blame the folks who sold him to slavery. He can blame Potiphar's wife. Then he ends up in prison. And in prison, he could blame all the different things. He can even blame God. Why? He gave me this dream showing me I was going to be this great guy, this great leader. And yet here I am in prison. But God was with him and he didn't lay blame. And God brought him out of prison and actually put him in the palace where he became second in command to Pharaoh himself and actually ended up saving the very same brothers who intended harm on him. He actually ended up saying in Genesis 50 verse 20 that you intended to harm me, speaking of his brothers when he finally saw his brothers many years later. But God intended it for good. So just to go back to John 9:3, some of us are asking the wrong questions. We're trying to place the blame instead of seeing or looking instead to see what God can do. God did it for Joseph. He can do it for you. So let's not blame, guys. Let's trust God. Let's see what God can do. Let's get to fixing versus blaming. Let's press forward. And our daily walk through Proverbs, word for the wise, comes from Proverbs chapter 19, verse 3. And it says, people ruin their lives by their own stupidity. So why does God always get the blame? That's a great question. People ruin their lives by their own stupidity. Or another translation says, a man's own foolishness lead him astray. But yet, his heart rages against God. When things don't go well in our lives, when it always seems like we're getting the short end of the stick, when people are accusing us, when people are doing evil things towards us, we shouldn't blame God. We should use our wisdom and knowledge to lean on God and trust on Him. He'll see you through anything. He will not leave you or forsake you. So one word of encouragement I would like to give you is to focus on what happens in you and not to you. Because God, greater is He that is in you than he that is in the world. He's going to see you through it. Instead of doing a blame game, instead of criticizing folks, let's work on fixing it. Let's look to see what God can do and what He will do and just give glory to Him. So guys, be encouraged. Until I see you tomorrow. Peace.